The YMCA Trinity Group, we're a charity and we're based in Cambridgeshire and Suffolk and Peterborough. So what's lovely about the work we do is that whilst we offer training to staff and teachers and a whole school mental health approach, we can also feed back into working with young people who are homeless and who are having bigger and wider struggles. So that's where we come from, that's our motivation. So look at practical strategies, and I have kept it very practical today, because I guess it's sometimes more helpful to have ideas rather than just theories. And I do want you to bear in mind as well that, you know, it's been a tough year for everybody. And whilst we don't directly talk about COVID-19, I am really conscious that you will all have your own experiences and your own stories. So please do look after yourself as we go through this. And if anything I say does trigger you or create upset in you, please do take time out, stop and look after yourself. I think self-care is a really important thing. The other point that I wanted to mention as well is that I've included a really wide range of strategies, and I'm relying on you being the expert in knowing your own child. So there will be some strategies that won't work so well for neuroatypical children, and there will be others that work brilliantly. So use your discretion in how you try and apply them. There's a real mix of common sense with some more or lesser known ideas, all based on the current research that's around at the moment. Like I said to those of you who earlier, please use the question and answer function. I will refer back to them as we go and try and make sure that we answer as many questions as we possibly can so that you get the best use out of this. Okay. So I'm going to start with a video. I didn't want to assume anything about the group of you who are here. So bear with me if it's stuff you know, and if it's not, I hope it's useful, and I hope my link is just going to work.
You know that scared or nervous feeling you get when you have to do something you're not sure you can do? Or go somewhere you've never been before? That feeling is called anxiety. And it can feel a bit different for each person, but it usually doesn't feel very nice. Maybe your palms get sweaty, or your body tenses up, or maybe you get a tummy ache. Maybe you've heard of anxiety, or maybe you haven't, but you've definitely felt it before. Because everyone feels it sometimes. It's normal. You want to know something really weird about anxiety? It's actually trying to help you. It's true. All those uncomfortable feelings, those happen because your brain thinks you're in danger, and it wants to protect you. When our muscles tense up and we sweat, it gets us ready to do a lot of exercise, which is helpful if you need to jump out of the way of a runaway train or wrestle a wolverine. Sometimes our minds go blank and we feel like we can't move or talk. That would be great if we needed to hide. Instead, we just feel stuck. When your brain does this, it's called fight, flight, or freeze. The problem is, sometimes your brain gets confused and it can't tell the difference between a charging moose and, say, going to a new school. Both things can be scary and cause anxiety. But there aren't any dangerous wild animals at a new school. Hopefully. Understanding where anxiety comes from is the first step in learning to deal with it. So the next time you're in one of those tough situations and you start to feel those feelings, like butterflies in your stomach, or sweaty palms, or it gets hard to talk or move, remember, there's nothing wrong with your body. You're just having normal feelings of anxiety, and they're actually trying to help, even if they're not very good at it sometimes.
Okay, let me try and work out how I get back. There we go. To my slideshow. So that was just a snippet to try and help give a picture, I guess, of what it might be for your young person, what they might be experiencing, or what we experience. To be totally fair, sweaty palms and a racing heart is where I was 5 minutes before this started. And one of the things that we can use is use clips like that to help explain to our children what is going on for them, and the fact that they're not going mad. This is a normal response, and it is a response that really does affect everybody at some point or other in their lives. And it's a response that we needed to survive, to be totally fair. It's important to think about, though, when it becomes something that is getting really in the way of everyday life. And one of the useful things to think about is to be whether it is totally overwhelming for that young person and they lose the ability to enjoy some of the things that they used to enjoy. They find that it gets in the way of them, laughing or accessing their friends. And when it feels like it's dominant in their life, then that's when it's worth encouraging them to talk and to seek professional help. And there's a slide at the end which will suggest some ideas of where you can go for help. And there's some great online resources as well. But I think, it is when it becomes a dominant feature of your life and it is getting in your way of doing the things that you love. That's when it does become a problem. And more than just teenage angst, I think, the other thing about it is that anxiety that's pervasive, that it's regular, it's predictable to a degree. Doesn't appear to be totally mood driven. So that's a key thing to hold in mind. It's an issue when it does get in the way of everyday life. So there's a couple of ways of looking at anxiety. So there's the evolutionary way. It's a helpful response that helped us survive saber-toothed tigers. And another way, for those of you that like sort of more logical cognitive ways of thinking about it, is to look at it in terms of an equation. So anxiety really it's the result of how terrible you think something will happen, times by what the chances are that it will happen. And then you divide that by really how well you believe, what your confidence is in you coping with that situation, and who else is around you to rescue you. What are your chances of getting out of that situation with the help of friends, family, and so on. So the higher the coping confidence and the coping skills, the lower the anxiety will be. And there's an interaction between that. And as we go through the following slides, we'll look at a mix of things actually that help boost that coping ability and reduce the strength of the anxiety. But I quite like that. I think it's quite a nice way of framing it. So the video we just watched touched on the fact that anxiety is a normal biological response. And I quite like this cartoon because it highlights really that for all of humans, really what we need is balance in our lives. And the autonomic nervous system is the system in our body that balances out the rest and digest and relaxation with the need to respond under stress. So the fight or flight or the adrenaline rushes. And when we have a balance of that, then actually we function really quite well. But when it gets out of kilter, that's when it struggles. And for people that experience anxiety, the sympathetic nervous system is overactive. So they're spending, certain situations or put in a situation of extra awareness. And some of my facial gestures will probably make sense when I get on to the next slide. But I think the important thing here is that it is a physical reaction as well as a mental reaction. And they feed each other as well, which is great because it opens up lots of ways that we can help our children. So 1 in 6 school-age children has a mental health problem. They're not all anxiety, but it has really risen throughout COVID. And I think it's we need to recognize that it's been a strange time and a strange situation for everybody. And it's alarming. It's gone up without a doubt. And I'm just going to check the chat if I can work out how to open it, because then I can just see. Oh no, I can't check it while I'm working. That's right. I'll come to that. So whoever's written in the chat, I'll come to that in a minute when I can. So it manifests itself. It's so different. It's so personal, anxiety. It really is different for everybody. There are common themes, but it is different for everyone. There's a physical response, there's a psychological response, and there's also the behavioural response as well. And I think that's what we'll go through and look at strategies that help tackle every single one of these different areas. And the physical responses are the ones that we're going to look at now. So these are the ones that are triggered by our autonomic nervous system. And the autonomic nervous system generally does things without us wanting to. Okay, so the fight or flight kicks in, and normally we're not aware that either it's going to or that it is. But we can teach ourselves some awareness about it. So physically, you may well have seen this in your children, and as they get older, they're able to verbalize it. And some of the physical things can make it quite tricky as a parent, because you get, well, I don't know, I get torn between, are they ill, or is this a physical manifestation of anxiety? So things like feeling sick, things like hot flashes, palpitations with their heart racing, tummy ache is a massive one, wanting to go to the loo more often. There are a whole, apologies. They're all things that are useful if we need to run from a tiger, but they're not useful if we need to go to school. And some of them you'll be able to see from the outside. You know, if you see a hot flush, you might be able to see that your child is feeling really tense. But some of them, we kind of rely on them to explain it for us and to let us know. And it's so unique to everyone. And it can be hard. You know, there are people that have been treated for tummy aches for many, many years. There's links between IBS and anxiety because of this interconnection that we have. So moving on to the psychological. Again, you very rarely have one without the other. Sometimes it's possible to have the physical side of it without realizing the psychological side of it's there. Some people will just feel ill because it doesn't cross their minds that actually they might be worried. But I think the psychological it can be quite isolating for somebody with anxiety. They can feel very self-conscious, very much like the world around them has changed slightly. It's speeded up, or it's slowed down, or they're in some way removed from the world. They're not enjoying it in the way that other people do. And the overriding thing, I think, often is wanting to get away, wanting to remove themselves from that situation, because there's something about that situation that scares them. They feel unsafe and they want to get out of it. And I think some of the psychological impact of anxiety can be from not understanding the physiological side of things. So if you're really out of breath, I do apologize, I seem to have a timer on here that I didn't intend. That if you're really out of breath and your heart is racing, then actually you can become scared that you're going to die. And then if you're scared, you get more out of breath and your heart races more, because that's a natural response to fear. So again, some of these our young people will be able to talk about, others will have to work out. So the behaviour is an interesting one, because this is very different for everybody. And we'll look at two broad groups of behaviour. We'll look at the hyper externalized actions that some young people take, and we'll also look at the internalized and the withdrawing that other people do. And this, I quite like the idea of this, because it highlights the point that sometimes behaviour is what's in our face. You know, it's what we actually get to see. But there's so much going on underneath it all. So the behaviours you might get to see are withdrawing. Well, you can see these coming up. I'm not going to just read them out to you. And again, they'll be unique for each of your children. I think one of the things which I thought was interesting is the word chandeliering, which is the idea. Bear with me 1 minute. I'm going to stop this and see if I can. Hold on. Okay, screen share, pause, stop share. Bear with me. I'm just going to see if I can turn this timer off because I think I'm going to be trying to work my way around it otherwise. Right. Okay. All right. Okay, we'll have to give you my apologies. I'm not sure I've solved this dilemma, but we'll work with it and I'm sure it'll be fine over time. So apologies though. Okay. So back to where we were talking about how the image of an iceberg is lovely because you can only see the very top. You can't see the depths that are underneath. And I think that's it's useful for us to hold in mind. And you can apply this to the anger iceberg and the fear iceberg and any form of behavior, to be totally honest. But it's a lovely way of looking at it. And chandeliering is the sense that someone is so heightened in their emotions that the smallest thing pushes them over there at the edge. So that idea that, you know, it's just you're holding on too much, and you're trying to pretend it's all fine, but the little things can send you over the edge and into an outburst. So one of the reasons why anxiety hangs around and stays in our lives for so long, if we don't pay attention to it and look out for it, is because it reinforces itself. If we see it as something that, you know, it's scary, and therefore we look around and we look for situations that are dangerous. If we've been bullied at school, so school seems scary, then we will look for extra danger in other social situations. And we might find ourselves looking to avoid them. And then because we've avoided them, we feel better about it. You know, it's okay, I'm safe now. But because we're safe, we never learn the skills that we need to boost our confidence and to boost our coping skills. So it becomes a vicious circle. And a really nice example is that of dogs. If you're scared of dogs, you never go near dogs, so you never meet any friendly dogs, so you stay scared of dogs, always. And what I like about the idea of this is that we can choose where we want to intervene. And it gives us lots of ideas of how we can actually help the young people that we love. So I'm going to start with some of the things that I know I've certainly said. I have a daughter who has anxiety. And certainly I meant them in the best possible way. So please don't beat yourself up if you've said them. You know, these are things that we think of. Don't worry, don't be scared. There's nothing to be afraid of. Well, actually, for that child, they still feel scared. And we unintentionally undermine it when we say there's nothing to be afraid of. We can make them think there's something wrong with them, that, you know, they're weird. They're the one that's really odd because they're scared. Yeah, no one else is afraid. You know, you'll be fine. Look, your brother and sister are okay. What is it about you? Why are you scared? And actually here we're talking, you know, we're asking our children something they probably don't understand. Some of it is a physical reaction that will kick in and they won't know why it starts or what sets their heart racing. And they can start to beat themselves up. They can start to feel like they're the odd ones. And then we can get into a vicious circle. You don't want me around, you know, I'm rubbish. I'm just a worse. And I think those are really, they're heartbreaking as parents for us to hear that. Really heartbreaking. You know, when we try and you're a worryable big baby, don't be so babyish. Again, we're accidentally undermining them. We're accidentally making them feel, reinforcing those thoughts that make them think they can't cope. There's something wrong with them. They'll never be able to do it. These are classic ones for me personally. Just calm down, chill out, chill, don't worry, come on, chill. And the other one's, oh, for God's sake, not now, please, not now. And I think with those sentences, that's my stuff talking. You know, that's not recognizing her worry and where she is at that moment. That's me. And to be totally honest, in the back of my head, I'm thinking, I've got to get this done, or we haven't got time, or we're only going into the shop, right? Just, you know, and that's my impatience and my frustration coming up. And I like to think that that's a shared experience from some of yourselves. I don't know, but I'm guessing it is. But what it can do, sadly, is silence our children. And it can make them feel like, you know, the fact that they're worried and the fact that they're scared is a bad thing, and that it's getting in their way, and that their mum wants them to be different and with like a different child. And I certainly don't want a different child. And I'm assuming you don't. I'd love my child not to necessarily feel anxious, but it's part of her journey. So those are a few things for us to hold in mind. And when we hear ourselves say them, to just think, hang on a minute. Is that about them or is that me? So a few things. So some of the things we can be unhelpful, even though we're being well-meaning. But what we're going to focus on now is the things that we can do to really help. And there are 3 main aspects I've grouped them as to help them interrupt their individual cycle of anxiety. So the first one is going to look at, apologies for my spelling mistake, those that are through ourselves and how we are as an adult, as an important person in their lives, and what we need to look at for us, which can be quite challenging and quite difficult, to be fair. Then we've got the idea behind teaching the child to understand and manage the physical aspects of anxiety. So these are lovely techniques because this is really useful when children aren't able to process it cognitively in their mind, especially if you've got a preschooler or a young person that isn't particularly literate or wordy, you know, or able to reflect on their own actions. So actually, we can help work with the physical side, and as we change the physiology, the anxiety will lessen. And then the third way that we can work with anxiety with our young people is to teach the thinking skills, to teach the psychological skills and a bit of mindfulness that will help them internalize how to bring their anxiety down and give them, all of it's about increasing the coping skills that they have. Some of the things that this is really useful for us to bear in mind, and this comes from research about how we manage our own individual autonomic nervous system and how we can use our self-awareness to influence both our physiology and also our psychology. Okay, so the first thing we really need to do is check out, where are we? Are we feeling calm? Are we feeling anxious? Often our moods are shared between people. It jumps around. And if we're feeling slightly on edge and slightly anxious, it will exacerbate our child's anxiety. If we're feeling frustrated or impatient, again, it'll exacerbate it. But we can learn to hide that by looking after our own physicality and our own physiology. So by hiding it and by being self-aware, what we can do is we help increase how safe our child feels, because they look at us, and if they see us calm in this situation, then they're going to feel calmer in the situation. And the ways to do that is through the tone of voice. So trying to lower our tone slightly. And it is about lowering from what is maybe your normal, you know, the normal run-of-the-mill, get on with it tone, down into something just slightly lower. And slowing down our speech as well, because people feel safe when someone speaks slightly slower than them, because it shows there's time. There's no rush. And that allows our parasympathetic to just kick in a bit and rest. I see I do this to myself as I'm talking to you. The speed of breath is a really key here as well, because when we're breathing the top of our chest, that actually stimulates the sympathetic, it stimulates the fight or flight. So if we can slow our breath down, increase our out breath, actually, it will help our children increase theirs without them even knowing it. So there was some lovely research recently that said that if a teacher is able to just slow herself down and be calm in her body, the pupils in her class were all calmer, which just makes sense. And I guess for all of us who've ever held a sleeping baby on our chest, actually when a child sleeps on us, we moderate at the same time as they moderate. And this is going right back to the attunement that we have with young people and children when they were babies. It doesn't change. And it happens with adults, between ourselves and our partners, or ourselves and friends. So body language is a good one. You know, too much quick movement, impatience, that will increase anxiety in the people we're around. Just calm, relax, slightly open can really help. Clocking our thinking patterns. Now, this is a subject for a whole other webinar, but we'll come onto it with some of the other thinking patterns we look at today. But this is a useful one, because if we're aware that we're thinking, oh God, this is going to make me late, I don't have time to deal with this, then that is going to change all of the things above. So just clocking our thinking patterns and our feelings. You know, if we look at our children and think, oh, I don't want this to happen, this is going to ruin their life, which can be the temptation. It is so distressing sometimes when we see they're so anxious. We can hold and have all of those feelings, and they're slightly infectious. They cross over. So if we can go to ourselves, okay, I'm feeling quite scared that this is scared for her future, for example, that's my stuff, I need to put that on one side. I'm going to just concentrate on being in the moment, being calm, and being there for my child. So self-regulating ourselves help us regulate our children. And it's a wonderfully powerful way of doing it, but it's pretty tricky to do on occasions. So the next thing we need to do as well is we can't solve everything for our children. So we can, though, be a feelings detective. We can use the fact that we're an adult to look at our children, to observe them and think, what's going on? What is their behavior telling me? Is their behavior telling me that they don't want to go out because they want to finish their computer game, or actually they don't want to go out at all, and it doesn't matter if I take away their computer, they still don't want to go out? Are they scared? Are they worried? What's behind they're going on? And then again, I think this talks about the different ways anxiety can be shown. Are they calm? Are they okay? Are they feeling brave? Are they suddenly running around all over the shop and really hyper? I know a lot of young people, a lot of children, the weekends before they were going back to school, were just all slightly woo. Or have they just retreated? Have they just gone, nah, blank, don't want to know, don't want to think about it? So be a detective with them and check in with yourself as well. And I think that will be a theme that we come back to throughout, as will this idea and the concept of breathing. And I will talk more about what makes breath, particularly anxiety, calming, and how to do that breath, because it's something that weirdly you'd think we would all know automatically, but we don't. We've kind of lost that art. So we're going to be a detective with our children. We're going to take that step back. We're going to notice where we're at. And then we're going to think, right, what's this about? And actually we can ask them to do it with us. So quite a lot of ideas here. And this is where we're going to get really, really practical, to be honest. So, let's do it again. So I split the responses that a child's behavior has into high energy and low energy, because that's the range of which it's portrayed. And these are some things that you can do with your child. So if you know that your child is going to be anxious saying goodbye to you at school, you could make sure that if you can, go for a walk before they get to school. And maybe, if sing or stamp or, verbalize it, shout it out, so that actually they are physically getting that nervous energy out of their body that can help them calm down. So the idea of singing and chanting and humming, which is a really good one, is the humming actively activates the parasympathetic nervous system. It makes us breathe out for longer than we breathe in. So actually, although it sounds louder, it matches where the child's at and then helps that child's body bring themselves down a level. The responses in here are a mix of in the moment or trying to prepare for a moment of anxiety as well. So if you have a young person who got themselves in a real state before bedtime and they're old enough and they're really unhappy, saying, right, okay, we're going in the car. We're getting in the car. We're going to go into some music. Hang on. No, enough. It's not good for either of us. Come on, let's have 10 minutes. And then changing the situation. It will help their body come out of the anxious state, which will then help their mind calm down. A lovely technique as well for those young people that don't know what's going on, for the younger children, is actually to say, do you know, I can see you're worried about me going home today. I can see you're worried that you're going into school. So what I want you to do is go in and say hello to Miss. And then Miss will tell you where to put your coat. So what we're doing there is we're taking the big fear of school and turning it into small steps. You can do that. You can say hello to Miss. And that's your plan. That's all you've got to do. And each time there's a little step and a little plan. So what I've done throughout this is try and put a range of strategies that will be relevant for, it will depend on your child. Putting music on that matches the mood might be more relevant for a teenager than a preschooler. But again, it's going to be following your gut instinct. And what is important to remember with this as well is that we talk a lot about needing to be calm with young people and with children. But sometimes if somebody's quite physically stressed, we need to meet them not with a dead flat calm, but just below their level of stress, so that the contrast is not too great. I don't know. I mean, for me, the example is anger. If I'm really angry and someone says, calm down, it doesn't help. If I'm really angry and someone says, do you know, I can see you're angry, I get that, and meets me just below my level of anger, I can then use them to come down. So the passive avoidant behaviours are a side of anxiety that is also really, really heartbreaking to watch. And they can be really tricky because all of these behaviours trigger stuff in us. So if you're a parent that is quite vivacious and positive, trying to respond to a negative flat can be a real challenge. And vice versa as well. If you're a quiet introvert, having a child that is massively extrovert and banging around is also a challenge. So with the passive avoidance behaviours, what you're wanting to try and do is meet them slightly above their passivity. So being there, being calm in yourself. If your child has taken themselves to bed and hidden under the duvet, just try and sit next to them, slow your breathing, and give them a bit of time for that physical reaction to settle down. Talk to them gently of things like maybe times when you felt worried or ways that you've seen them cope, rather than trying to problem solve. Just be there. Again, the music and the breathing, we'll talk about those, are really good ones. And use a time when they're not stressed and they're not anxious to say to me, what do you want me to do when you're stressed? For a 12-year-old, they might need to be asked and to give you some advice. They might say, well, when you do that, it makes it worse. Please don't. Or, whatever it is that they come up with. I think we all know how when that idea of when we were with toddlers, that sometimes they just needed to be held. You know, sometimes they physically can't stop their behavior themselves. They just need someone to just go, it's all right. We're gonna stop, and I'm gonna hum to you. I'm gonna sit into you, and your body will just settle. Again, please put your hand up if I'm going too fast, too slow, and let me know where we're at with this. So anxiety is about feeling unsafe. It's about feeling scared, worried. And there's a fairly long clip here by a wonderful woman who has loads and loads of resources online that are available to everybody. And she's called Pookie Knight-Smith. And she does a lot of work with teachers, and she's looked and developed a set of phrases that really help show. And I'm actually going to let you watch her because I think she explains it much better than I do. Because, you know, there are things that may not feel natural, but can be really, really useful. And she knows.
If you develop a few stock phrases, if you practice them regularly.
Wait 1 minute. Right, I'll just bear with me. Hopefully the buffering will stop in a moment. I love that picture. That is
Okay, so in today's bite-sized CPD, we're going to be thinking about how you can develop some stock phrases to help you communicate calmly at times when you don't feel very calm. So we're thinking about those times when a child's having a bit of a anxious or angry meltdown and tempers are kind of rising, and you know that what you really need to do is to communicate calmly, but actually you feel like this. Okay, so what we know about calm communication, you can watch my other video on that should you wish to, is that essentially we want to talk low, so kind of quieter and lowering the kind of pitch, and slow. So I always like to think of those lovely audible narrations. So when you're listening to audiobooks and these people have those lovely velvety voices and they kind of almost like would lull you to sleep. So be thinking about communicating like that. And then we're going to think about developing some phrases that you can use, because if you develop some stock phrases, you can practice saying them. You can practice saying them when you're walking the dog or when you're in the shower or whatever, and you can practice saying them in your low, slow, calm voice, so that then when you're feeling like this, you're able just to roll with those phrases because you've practiced it, and you can tune everything else out, and you can be the adult that child needs you to be, rather than the adult that you feel like inside. So sometimes we fake it till we make it, right? Okay, so the kinds of phrases that might work. This really can vary massively, and it's great if you develop your own, and we'll give you a couple of pause moments slightly later in the video for you to do that. But just to kind of get you on board with the sorts of thing I'm thinking about, the sorts of things that people have often told me works well for them are things around the fact that you're listening, and things around the fact that the child is safe. So we know that anger and frustration likes to be heard, so a child needs to know, I'm listening. There's no need for you to kind of rant and rave and shout, I'm listening, I'm ready to listen. Or, you know, if they're anxious and really, really struggling and don't feel safe, they need to know, it's okay, you know, I've got this, you're safe. So phrases that people have shared with me in recent training that they have found to be effective for them: I care and I'm listening. So I care and I'm listening. I'm ready to listen when you're ready to talk. That for me sounds a little bit passive aggressive. I'm ready to listen when you're ready to talk. But actually, in the right circumstance, it's exactly what a child needs to hear. You know, once you're calm enough to communicate, I'm going to be here and listening. So I'm ready to listen when you're ready to talk. Next, you're safe. I've got you. A teaching assistant in a recent Twilight session I was teaching told me how her colleague always said this to a particular child, and that it always soothed this child, and she would just hold her and say, it's okay, you're safe, I've got you, you're safe, I've got you. And the colleague had no idea that she did it. She just did it on automatic pilot, and so that was a really lovely moment. So you're safe, I've got you. And then the simple, it's going to be okay. Sometimes that's what we all need to hear. So it's going to be okay. So our kind of suggestive phrases, you can pick them apart. Maybe you hate them, but so I care and I'm listening. I'm ready to listen when you're ready to talk. You're safe, I've got you, and it's going to be okay. So I want to pause for a moment and give you a chance to have a think about the kind of phrases that you can imagine using that might work for the children and young people in your care. So what feels right to you? Okay, take a moment. What phrases might work for you? Okay, so once you've had a think about the kind of phrases that might work for you, then it can be really useful to share them back and maybe actually agree on a few that you might use as a team, because it can be really helpful sometimes for children to have that kind of predictability and consistency. And also, if you've got these kind of agreed phrases that you all feel comfortable using, whether that's kind of across the board or with a specific child, that can be really helpful. So maybe have a think if there are like 2 or 3 phrases that you might all share as a staff body that you might all try to use. So have a think.
Okay, so I'll leave it there. Let's see, and but the links for her are in the references, and brilliant, absolutely brilliant. All right, let me just see how to get this back up to full screen. There we go. One of the things that I wanted to pick up as well with something that she said there was about consistency. And Pookie was talking about it in terms of a staff team, but actually in terms of a parenting team or a parent and sibling team, if there's lots of you in your family, trying to agree on a joint approach can be really, really helpful, because it helps that child feel even safer that both of the adults have got the same way of doing it. They can predict what's going to happen. So that's really key. And the bit that Pookie will also go on and talk about is about validating our children's fears. So it's really important that if they can name and recognize their experience, that's great, but that we name and recognize their experience too. Because regardless of what our opinion is, it's real for them. This is a real physical reaction, and the thoughts are really in their head. And it can be worth, again, having some stock phrases for that. And there's a list that I'm going to go through here. But it is about saying, you know, I'm really sorry that you're scared about going back to school, or you're scared of a particular group of people. I think it's really hard. I get that. That makes sense. You know, with younger children, it can be really good to say, do you know what? I can see that going to school is really worrying you. Shall we make a picture about it? Shall we draw the things that you like and that you don't like? And again, it depends on the age and also on your relationship, to be fair. Some children don't want to talk to us. And I think that's a really valid point, that you don't have to necessarily be the one that solves it for your child. It might be that they find an aunt or an uncle or a grandparent, or family friend, that they would feel better able to talk to than yourselves. Well, that's a little bit of a bitter pill to swallow. It can be actually really good, because it means that they can talk to that family member actually about what is really going on without being so worried about upsetting us as their parent, because we're the most important people mostly in their lives. I like that one. It sounds really hard. Do you want to talk about it? And I think, again, reassurance that it's not silly either. You know, this is important. You know, this, and one of the things I sometimes tell my son is, I'm sorry, I know I get really impatient, and it's because it's really important to me, because it's really important that it's upsetting you, and I'd like us to try and find a way to help it and not upset you. So think about what it is in your family and your family ways of helping your children feel heard and listened to. If you can, you know, put aside some time. Do you know what? I think it's really important. Let's go. We used to be able to go and get coffee, but, you know, let's have a cup of tea. Let's have a coffee. let's go for a walk, let's go for a drive. Sometimes situations where the eye contact isn't there makes it much easier for our children to verbalize what's going on. Hiding under a blanket, okay, I can see you're really upset, and when you calm down a bit, let's hide under the blanket, and then you can tell me, and I won't look at you, I won't answer you, or I won't try and make it better. I will just listen. And that can be quite hard as a parent. If you're a doer parent, if you're a problem solver, we want to try and sort it out. We want to reassure. So to be able to just say to our child, you know what, I'm going to just listen. Okay. And then when I can talk, you tell me. Because actually, that bit is important. It's about giving that a little bit of control back to the young person. Okay. So we've talked about ways that we can verbalize how we want to help our young people, and strategies of creating more safety through words and reassurance and validation. The other way that we can help our young people verbally is by explaining what's happening physically. So actually the fear of a panic attack and the fear that their body is taking on a rhythm of its own that they can't control. Again, it acts to increase the situation. And one of the things, we can help reduce that by saying, this is your body doing what your body needs to do. It will pass. Okay, your body can't feel like this forever. It will change. Okay, this is what our bodies, they're designed to be able to run really, really fast for a period of time away from a tiger, and then to sleep and recover. So sentences like, give it a minute, and then let's see if it changes slightly. Or, do you know what, you've been here before, and I remember seeing you come out the other side. Do you remember that? And if they've got, if humor is something you can use with your child, something like, do you know what, I can see from the look in your face that you think there's a saber-toothed tiger here in this room. I can't see one. Can you see one? And actually encouraging them to look for a saber-toothed tiger can really help reset our nervous system. It can help bring that parasympathetic in. And there's some lovely techniques like just looking out of the corner of your eyes until you yawn or you sigh, and then you do it on the other side. And that again just helps reset our autonomic nervous system. And it can take some practice. It might take you up to a minute or so before you yawn. So we can reassure our children verbally. We can also think about other things that might give context to young people's behaviour. And I've put here puberty, menstrual cycle, screen time, and lack of exercise. And I think they're useful for us to hold in mind, because changes in our body can increase at times of puberty, especially for young women. And it can do some really interesting things that we might not think about. So, for example, if a young person, if a girl is reaching puberty quite early and perhaps ahead of some of her friends, she might be worrying about wetting herself or about the physical changes in her body, but not really understanding that it's normal, or that actually these things will happen to us. And she might not be able to put into words the things she needs to help her planet. So, for example, a young person might start not wanting to go to school because she's scared she's going to get her period and not be ready for it, not have the pants that she needs or the pads or whatever it is that she needs. So if we're thinking about these things, we can then put together kits for our young people. So if, for a young girl, you could put together a puberty kit that she can keep in a nice little bag at the bottom of her school bag. Or for a person who's worried that he's going to get really bad temper because he won't eat, or that he's going to be given food that he can't eat because it's the wrong texture or the wrong colour or it's not a flavour he likes, we put together a pack of food that he can eat and some sentences to help them say, I'm not going to have this, but I've got this with me. So we can, by thinking bigger about the context, the physiological context, puberty, diet, we can help our young people plan for what's going on and to understand and have that body knowledge. Screen time's an interesting one because it varies depending on what type of game somebody's playing a lot of, but some of them are really high stimulus. And actually, if a young person has had a really high stimulus game and then suddenly needs to go into a slightly scary situation, they're going to be doubly wound up. So that's worth thinking about. There are some really good games as well that are designed to help unwind and chill people out with calming music and apps that go with it. And again, lacks of exercise. You know, sometimes we just need to move. And if we don't move, we get all a bit jittery. And these things can all feed in. Okay, so there were some specific strategies, a lot of them verbal, and touching on some of the physical things. What I want to do now is move into thinking about some of the day-to-day things. So, you know, they're in the moment, and then day-to-day we can do a lot with our young people to reduce their experience of anxiety. Movement is brilliant. The more movement we can get, the better, whether it's rolling our shoulders or our necks or going for walks, dancing, if they've got a treadmill, or you can go for a run, brilliant. Everybody's different. But it is a classic way of altering our body chemistry and bringing on the good hormones and the good chemicals. And also importantly, it supports good sleep, because good sleep is also really important in allowing our body to have that rest and relaxation time, and again to reduce anxiety. And that, you know, it can be harder said than done. I haven't got enough time to go into detail about how to support good sleep in real detail, but a lot of the techniques about the breathing and the mindfulness will be useful. And actually, any movement when a child is concerned is really useful, because it brings them out of their head and into the room where they're at. So a movement like this, where you're just moving your hand around your fingers, it stops them thinking about what is scary. And then you can do it as you breathe in, you breathe out, you breathe in, you breathe out. You can slow it down. And that in itself, it changes that concentration. So that's a lovely one to do with young children. And actually, you can do it under the table. Nobody needs to know you're doing it, which I quite like about that. So bringing some of these things into day-to-day life. So it's not connected with anxiety, it's just connected with, you know what, this is how we're going to feel good in our lives. That's really key. Thinking about your diet, there's lots of NHS guidance out there. Reducing stimulants, reducing sugar, these can all help. Our children, as we know, can be harder to do it, especially when, you know, young people are quite good at being quite demanding sometimes. Act of kindness, I love as an idea. And I think it's brilliant. This comes from the neuroscience, and it's talked a lot about by Dan Siegel. But actually, by smiling at someone or doing something kind to somebody, you cannot be anxious at the same time. Physically, they cancel each other out. So I love that. If you bring that in to your day-to-day life, thinking about what can we do today? What's our act of kindness today? Again, it just increases that time when that young person's not feeling worried. And then connecting with other people as well is a really key important part. And then connecting about things that are outside of the anxiety as well. So again, it's anything that builds that coping system, you know, finding other adults to talk to, like I mentioned. Cooking online, playing games online. I guess we're a little bit out of lockdown now, but you know, if Granny and James, for want of a better name, can both have their phone on and cook the same meal at the same time and swap photographs, there's building a connection there. And sometimes with older teenagers, when they're feeling very teenage, just being in the same room can be quite nice. Just saying, you know what, let's just sit together and watch telly. Or even you sit on your phone, I'll sit on mine, or I'll read my book, or just spend time. And actually that, you know, it works to make us feel better. And to really focus on other things, focus on other skills as well. You know, if your young person does make dinner or make a cup of tea, notice it. catch them being good. So we're putting in these little bits that build their confidence. As we build that confidence, their belief in their ability to cope will increase as well. Day-to-day thoughts and practices as well. So distraction is a really good one. So, you know, where you have time, and if you have time where you think your child is generally getting anxious, but there's not a specific event, then encouraging them to do something that is different. I've just realized that most of mine are, you know, art, coloring, craft, gardening. There's a lot about nature here that is really good for our autonomic nervous system and our parasympathetic. But again, it's anything that helps them realize that they can choose to think about something different, so it becomes manageable. And I think that's really, really key. So awareness, mindfulness, and breathing. I put 3 words down here because some people really react quite negatively to the word mindfulness. They feel like it's a bit of a buzzword, and some people don't like it, but some people do. Being present was one that I heard today, which I thought was quite lovely, actually. And it's the idea of coming into the moment. So, okay, there might be something, we might be out in the shopping centre, and I'm starting to feel a bit panicky because there's so much noise and it's very distracting and scary, and coming into the moment. And there are different ways that you can do that then. So you can do it by what's called the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 exercise, where you look for 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things that you can hear, 2 things that you can smell, and then if you can taste something, 1 thing you can taste, or 1 great big deep breath, and then breathe it out slowly. So that's a lovely technique that if you're with somebody who gets very anxious, you can encourage them to look at you and go through it. And it can be any sense in any order, it doesn't matter. The key premise is, what can you feel? What can you hear? What can you see? And again, they come out of their mind and into that moment. It's also a grounding technique. This is what it can also be told about. So other techniques that you can use to think about this are the breathing ones. So a key one is to breathe in for 4 and out for 6, with the key being to breathe out for longer than you breathe in. And that just brings the parasympathetic in to just help you calm the fight and flight tendency. And the breath is amazing. It's the one automatic system in our body that we have some conscious control over. We can't have conscious control over our circulation or our digestion or anything else, but we can with our breathing. If we notice it and we pay attention, we can influence it. And that is a way into influencing the physiological side of anxiety. So another lovely idea about mindfulness is not necessarily coming into your immediate where you are, but imagining your safe space in your head. And this is a lovely practice that you could do every day before bed, or at a relevant point of time. And you ask your child to sit down and think about where they feel safest, and get them to imagine that when they're there, what do they feel? And what do they touch? What can they hear? What can they see? What can they smell? And to help them build a picture that they can hold in their mind of their safest place in the world. And then by doing that every day, the young person then starts to be able to bring it into their mind in situations where they're slightly scared. And they can bring that feeling of safety in to just help bring that anxiety down and just help that anxiety disappear a little bit. So that's a lovely technique, and that's something that we can start with our children as well. There's lots of books out there for younger children, primary school children, preschool, where we can start talking about these stories and helping them just bring them into teaching them those skills on a day-to-day basis. So that's a couple more. There are lots more, and YouTube is wonderful in terms of having examples and illustrations of different breathing techniques and different ways to be present and aware, and how you can use that. Music's a lovely one, because specific music like Baroque music or Vivaldi's lute concertos, Mozart's sonata for 2 pianos, actually very much tap into our vagus nerve and kick in the parasympathetic as well. And that's also the same for Gregorian chanting. So, you know, if you've got a young person that's anxious in the car and you don't mind listening to that sort of music and you like it, you can put that on, you know, because actually that'll just hopefully help settle it down. Whereas, you know, hardcore trance on the way to school might not help at that point. Okay. So CBT techniques we'll talk about a bit more in a moment. And these are where we're moving into the idea that our mind can influence our physiology here. This is challenging the psychological impact of anxiety. So thinking about things so that you can plan ahead, you know, okay, so I'm worried about going to school. What am I worried about? I'm worried that I will lose my way around my secondary school. If I lose my way around my secondary school, then I will look at the map that I've got in my bag. If the map's not in my bag, then I will ask so-and-so. So these are self-talk techniques that young people can use. Focusing on the fact that it will always change. Feelings always change. They're not permanent. And that's kind of lovely. I mean, it's a bit sad if you're in love, you don't really want that to change, but generally it's quite useful that feelings they will always change. And actually there are some lovely techniques about noticing your mood, being aware of how you're feeling and saying, okay, so I can tell I'm getting worried. Thank you. That's useful for me to know. Thank you, anxiety, but I don't need you today. So do you know what? I'm going to fake it till I make it. I am going to pretend I'm not anxious and I'm going to sit in front of you all and deliver a webinar. But that kind of awareness and talking to yourself can really help. And again, the planning side of it, as long as it's done when someone's calm and prepared. So for example, if your child is anxious about going out shopping, it's about saying, well, we're going to park here. And if we can't park here, we'll park there. And then I'm going to do this and I want you to do this while I do that. And this is the time scale. And helping people have a picture of what's going to happen and bringing it a little bit into their control. So for example, if you have a young person who hates being left in the car, even if it's just because you want to go and pay for petrol, it's planning exactly how to do it. That's one to think through. So touch briefly on this a little bit sorry about this, when we were talking about breathing, but it also ties into movement, and there's some great neuroscience around at the moment about how we pull in the different sides of our brain together. So these will be on the slides, and they're great. So what they do is they help balance our brains. So crossing using the opposite arm and leg is really useful. And then hookups, which is where you sit down and you put your left leg on top of your right leg, and then you put your hands out like that, and then you put your right hand over and you pull it up and you sit like that for a while, and then eventually you push it away. So the videos are there. And they could be great for younger children. They're part of the Brain Gym program, which was designed by neuroscience, that really just helped children get into a place where they can learn. And the place where you can learn in your brain is the same as the place where you're calm and you're not worried about anxiety. So that's really good. And it was they're good. They came around in about the 1980s. And then repetition can be soothing as well. So if it's the night before you go back to school, encouraging your child to knit, same repetitive movements, busy as your hand, draw figures of 8, and I can't do it, but figures of 8 with your fingers going the opposite ways. It must be like that. Or even drumming. Again, they all occupy the brain and allow us to relax a bit. So for older ones, how are we doing for time? This is a lovely video that it will be in the references, and you can search for it. It's called You Are Not Your Thoughts. And again, this is about helping our children understand that we're not what we think. We're more than that. So if we think we're stupid, we're not. That's just our thought. Our thought is doing something different. And that actually, if we can challenge some of those thoughts, then it helps free us up and it helps us not be stuck anymore. So putting anxiety in the dock is a key one. Okay, so I am really scared of getting on the school bus. And then you might pretend to cross-examine your thoughts. Well, hang on a minute, why are you scared? Have you got any evidence there's reason to be scared? Has anyone scared you on the bus? And you can really explore. Do you have to be scared? Could you be something else? Could you be brave? What would need to happen for you to be able to be brave? So these are great for slightly older kids, and there's a lot of resources on the Anna Freud website, which is listed at the bottom, that can help explore these cognitive behavioral techniques that we've got here. So I will have a quick look at this one because it summarizes it quite well.
Our thoughts, feelings and behaviours continually affect each other, and it's easy to develop negative patterns where unhelpful thoughts lead to unhelpful feelings and actions. Sometimes this can become a vicious cycle. Many of us don't realise that we can influence this process and that this can improve our mental health. The best way to deal with these unhelpful thoughts is to recognise them, challenge them, and see if you can replace them. Some people call this the catch it, check it, change it approach. With practice, this can help us look at perceived problems from a different perspective. For example, you might be worried about an important task you have to do at work, convinced it will go wrong and everyone will think you're a failure. Rather than immediately accepting this thought and feeling even worse, take a moment to catch it and check it. Ask yourself whether there's good evidence for it, or if there are other explanations. Try thinking about what you would say to a friend who was thinking this way. Finally, see if you can change the thought for a more positive one. Maybe, I'm prepared, I've put a lot of work in, and I'm going to do my best. Sometimes you will be able to change the thought to a positive one, but don't worry when at other times you can't. There are no right or wrong answers. It's about learning to think more flexibly and be more in control. By catching the thought, checking it, and seeing if you can change it, with practice, you can help break the negative cycle.
Okay, so I love that. It's really simple, and it's something that we can teach ourselves and our young people from quite a young age. Actually, children will get that and they will love it. There's a lovely visualization where you catch your thought that you're worried and then you blur it away, and you can do that with sadness as well as anxiety and anger as well. So a whole range of different things. And I suppose you could possibly try and breathe in some positivity as well. You could do that. Yeah, I like that. So that clip for me, the cognitive behavior, it touches on this idea that be kind to yourselves. And I guess it's helping us teach our children to be kind to themselves, that actually, you know what, when they're anxious, it's okay. And what would you say to your friend in this situation? Or you'd say, it's okay, it's fine, don't worry, you're not going to be scared. You know, get them to do their own self-talk as well. So that covers some of the cognitive behavioral side, the psychological ways that we can work. And I'm aware that we've had lots and lots of information in a really short period of time and quite a wide range. So what I'd like to do, so I'm just going to talk about Anna Freud. They have a wonderful website that's really worth exploring. And it's a website that teenagers can explore for themselves. It covers a whole range of different mental health issues. But there's lots of resources for parents as well as for young people. And they are really good as a resource if you're starting to worry a little bit about is this something more serious? Do I need to get extra help? So Anna Freud is a good resource, and Young Minds is another good website that has a lot of stuff on for parents. There's also Anxiety UK. Now, for some of our young people, if their anxiety is getting in the way of sleeping, actually there are some really useful apps out there. Calm is one, Headspace is another. It's really worth just having a look around and seeing what suits them, because I think that's tricky. I'm not going to dwell on this. This is a body scan, and there's lots online about how that can help. First of all, help you sleep, but also just help bring you into the moment, bring you into the presence. This is an acronym that will be on the slides that we send out. So what I'm going to do, I'm not going to dwell on it. I'm just going to, there we go. That's the where to look for mental health. Please do seek advice, talk to school. If you have a pastoral lead at school, talk to them. And if possible as well, if you can, if your family culture, for want of a better word, or your family way of being allows you to share it in the family, so that it's something that's not shameful or something that's you don't feel embarrassed by, that's really helpful for young people if you can, because it normalizes it, and it takes away the shame and the stigma of the fact that that young person might struggle to speak to people, or struggle to speak to strangers, or struggle to go to school, because they're not alone. And actually most people struggle with things at one time in their life or another, and as adults we can often legitimately avoid it, but our young people can't avoid school. We've developed a society where they have to go, so you know that we have to, it's not a thing for them to be ashamed of if they do find it scary or worrying or upsetting. Okay, so that's just a brief recap, and I will leave. Oh no, it's gone, it's on its own life again. Let me stop sharing. Lovely. Right, hello. So I would like now, if it's okay, we've got about 10 minutes. I think the link will come up when we close Zoom anyway, and it would really help us out if you could complete a brief survey. It takes about 3 minutes to do, and just give us some feedback, because it helps us develop and it helps me learn, but also it'll help inform the next series of webinars, which we're doing June time. I think we've got another one coming up, and we can let you know when that's happening. I now want to go back through the questions, and do please feel that you can put more questions in. Okay, so we can send a recording out for anyone that's missed it, that's fine. And I will, please just pop your name into the question or the chat, and I can make sure I do that. Okay, so that's a really good question. So how can I help? And then they say, let me stay at home and don't make me go out. And I think it's a tricky one, because I think a good place to start would be to find out if they're, what it means to them and what their understanding is of anxiety. So show them the videos that we looked at tonight. And what you can say to that is, if they say, let me stay in and make me go home, you can say something along the lines of, I know that would help you feel better immediately, but my worry is that in the long term, it's not going to be helpful. Can we talk about a plan, a series of steps that might need to be taken to enable somebody to go? Because I think you're right. And I think you can differentiate as well with your daughter, to say, how can I help at this moment versus how can I help in the future? I think the fact that it would be interesting to understand where a fear has come from. So when you're out walking maybe, or doing something, whether someone's told a story about, this is around wetting themselves, or someone she's read something or seen something on television where, you know, maybe a celebrity said the most embarrassing that ever happened to me was I wet myself in front of my friend. And it could be that doing an activity with her which helps her plan. So number one, what she would do if she needed to do it if she did weigh herself, but 2, the steps that she would like to learn so she can go out. I think the dilemma of when to make your child do something and when not to is really difficult. It almost comes back down onto gut instinct, and I think as well onto your own fears and your own experience of being away or scared or upset and sad. I think if you believe your child is genuinely scared and she gets into that fight or flight, I think you just got to make that call yourself. I didn't make my daughter go on her school trip. Other parents I know did. The downside was my daughter didn't face it and learn that she had the coping skills. So I suppose it's about actually maybe having the plan around the backup plan, the rescue plan. If you get there and you really hate it after half an hour, then ask this person to give me a ring and I'll come and get you. You definitely have a recording of this webinar. Without a doubt. Okay, so with the wetting, I think it's a valid fear. I think I'd reassure her, and I would think about something quite practical for something like that, like period pants. And if you could afford to buy a couple of pairs for her, so that on the day she's really nervous, she can go to school wearing them, and it might reassure her. So that could well be in it, and it also could be about transitions. And it's been tricky with being at home. It's reassured a lot of young people, but the fear of going back can be a little bit worse. Okay, so in terms of anxiety that's situation specific, I think those anxiety, the strategies like the breathing, the grounding, if it's someone who's doing something physical, stamping your feet on the ground and breathing can help manage that physical moment of feeling sick. I think there's also some quite nice clips on YouTube about how important that is to some athletes, and that actually how they've got over it. So it's not an unusual situation to feel physically tricky. Question about separation anxiety. That's a really interesting one. If the child's young, one of the things that can be really lovely is to have a treasured object, whether it's a jumper that smells of you or a special teddy, or something that it's called a transitional object, they can take with them so they feel that you're there with them. I used to kiss my daughter's finger loads of times, 15 times, and tell her that I'd filled it with kisses. So if she needed anything kissed better when she was at school, she just had to touch her little finger. So I think that can really help with separation anxiety. And if it's an older child, you can put in a plan of when you want to check in with them or when they want to check in with you, but try and avoid having to respond quickly. That can be tricky, especially if you've got no signal or the WhatsApp doesn't come through. So hang on, let me start here. So getting back into this, so the panic attacks and the dizziness, I think is so really very much going for the physical strategies for that, to get back into the classroom. If she's able to articulate what she thinks the fear is, then that's great. But there are some strategies like you put your arms in and you push against each arm, and that can help ground you. Sitting down and putting your feet on the ground, get her to wear flat shoes so that she feels in touch with the ground, and when she's scared she pushes her feet in. That can help reduce panic attacks. Another thing that's lovely for that is where she's feeling she can't breathe, what to do is to ask her to breathe out as if she's breathing through a straw, and try and get her to practice this when she's at home. So literally she breathes in and then it's for as long as she can. So what it does is it stops the gasping if she can, and if she's got a little straw she can carry around with her and she's prepared to give that a go, all the better. But it slows our out breath down, and that allows our body a little bit of time to try and catch up. And I think the supporting her and the helping her through is believing that it will pass. It will pass. It won't be forever. Keep track and see if it's worse at different times of the month. because that might be relevant, and be there, you know. I think that is, you know, the key, as much as we can be. It's a bit of a cliche to say it, but it is about saying, I'm standing next to you, and if she's concerned she's going to pass out and hit the ground, then maybe try and do a bit of planning around her route into school. You know, can she be near walls? I mean, it depends where her fear sits, but if she's worried about passing out and making a fool of herself, you know, there might be things she might be able to go into the classroom a little bit early so other people can't see her, and then she can get herself together. So year 7, when he's having in the moment, I think again it's going to be about articulating that for him, and then giving him tasks. I want you to do this. So it might not be a big task, but it might be, I want you to draw how cross you're feeling, or go and hit a pillow, or something, you know, stamp your feet 5 times, and then I'm going to stamp my feet 5 times, and then we're going to check in with how we're feeling. How do you feel after your 5 times? Oh, bonus, a bit better. Good. So I think those kind of moments, I hope the talk answered some of those questions for you. Definitely email it. Brilliant, good plan. That's a really lovely planning. I think sometimes I think is we just have to allow it time as well. I think that is the hardest thing as a parent, is to stop trying to solve it and trust and allow that it will solve itself in its own time. And I don't, you know, these things can be phases, but it's quite hard when you're in the middle of the phase, isn't it? I think it's really tricky. Okay, managing his tics at school without making him feel like it's a problem. So I think that is, there's some particular stuff around about it, which I'm not an expert on. But one of the things I would say is that to try and help him understand that his tics are something that his body needs to do, and that it's, I don't know how they manifest themselves, but that actually his tics make him unique, and that he will be learning stuff about life that other people will never have the chance to do. So it's not so much, it's about being realistic about having a difference and accepting a difference, and for it not to become a burden or a trick. I think there are some ways that you can learn how to tic more pro-socially, but I'm not sure if it's swearing based. But I think the other thing I would do as well is to plan with the teachers. So if they're quite strong tics, is to try and do some proper planning with his teachers about how they're going to explain them to the class, what people around them, you know, what do they need to be careful of. If he moves suddenly and someone's likely to get hit, then, you know, do some planning around it. But if they're small ones, it's about helping him understand that it's something that his brain and his body just needs to be done. A bit like, I guess, stims in autistic people. So for autistic people, repetitious movement, it can be really reassuring, and it can help them manage anxiety. So if you have someone that's rubbing their hands anxiously, that can be a self-soothing strategy, and that it's important not to always try and dismiss it or tell them to stop, because actually that can be, so my daughter does this with her fingers, because that's touch, that keeps her in her body, that keeps her there. So I think that's important. Switch off, closing his world, disconnection. I don't know. So for separation anxiety, I think that sounds something that it's worth looking into and maybe exploring, because when a young person switches off, often what it is that their autonomic system is overloaded, and so they shut down, and the stress or the situation they're in is too much. And if a young person's anxiety gets them to the point where they disconnect and switch off, it's quite important to come back and start with what we call the window of tolerance. So start with the tasks that they can cope with, and then build slowly with that. So so that they're not then, because when our physical system becomes overwhelmed, no point in talking to our mental system. It just can't function until it's settled. So I would suggest that if someone is disconnecting, then trying to take a trying to find out at what point are they willing to try a little bit more, and at what point do they disconnect? What is the bit that is too much? And then slowly build up that tolerance, because it's tricky, but often there are things that have happened in our lives that will have had an effect on our children that we weren't aware of. And especially at the moment, you know, COVID is it's a big thing, and kids are really scared. And I think it's important to recognize as well that children are really scared that their adults around them that they love might die. And depending on what they've heard on the news and everything else, some of it's going to be about just reassurance. And do you know what? It's absolutely valid to be scared of COVID-19. It's pretty scary, but actually we're doing everything we can to take care of it. And I'm taking care of you at the moment. You know, I'm okay, and I'm going to be okay because I'm keeping myself safe. Yeah, so I hope they help. I think I've covered most of the questions, and so I can't be more direct in terms of, like, you know, how much do you make someone face fear and how much do you not? Sometimes I think it's interesting because sometimes whether a child has to face their fear is kind of dependent on how much time the parent who's there caring has. And that can be quite interesting, because sometimes it's important for it to not be about them, but maybe for it to be about the parent. So on occasion, you know, you've got to go to school, I've got to go to work. You're not ill, I'm not ill. It's just got to happen. I'm really sorry. We've got to plan how to make this happen. And that's been totally out of kilter for the last year. So thank you all very much. I hope it's been useful. And I look forward to getting your feedback. I think, please feel free. I think you've got an email address for us. Actually, I can put it in the chat because I think you can see the chat now, which is good. So you are welcome to email if you have specific questions that I can help answer. And I wish all your young people the best of luck, actually, on their journey through their anxiety, because I think I guess they'll learn a lot more about a different side of the world than people of us who haven't had anxiety. It gives it a different perception and a different view of it. So I think that's brilliant. Okay, so Son is autistic, working with school, that's brilliant. So absolutely, I think that idea of and you know what, the idea that they worry that our parents might die, they might die, is a big thing. And maybe if you can, it'll help him if he has a plan. Or maybe he just needs to have a plan that when he thinks that, he does a certain thing, whether he draws a particular picture or he writes a letter, or I don't know what his thing is, or even he just does a set of movements. So whenever he thinks that, he does a hookup until his body calms. So it's not a false promise. I think that makes sense. Definitely. So one of the things I would like to also just, I'm going to go because it's been a long evening, but just to mention, to also think about our own anxiety, and that if you are someone that has your own anxiety, to maybe be more open about it within the family and say, do you know what, I'm not surprised you get worried because I get a bit worried. So how are we going to do stuff about that? What's your challenge today? How are we going to do it? Because I think some of it can be useful. But I will send the recording out to everybody, and I will let you well, I will disappear off, go and get on with my evening, and all of yours. And thank you all very much for your input and your questions. Thank you. Good night.